Did you know America wasn't the first democracy in North America? Long before the U.S. Constitution was written, the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca tribes, together known as the Haudenosaunee, formed the Great Law of Peace. It was a model of democracy with a federal system, legislature, veto powers, and even freedoms of speech, press, and religion. Yes, the USA didn't invent democracy, they borrowed it. Thinkers like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Karl Marx, and Frederick Engels studied this system. And yet, ironically, the people who inspired American governance were later pushed onto reservations. So, what happened? To understand that, we need to go back to the US Constitution. Why? One word: treaties. The word Indian appears 3 times in the Constitution, first to imply Native people were NT citizens, and later to declare that Congress has the power to regulate commerce with Native tribes. That one sentence recognizes tribes as sovereign nations, capable of negotiating only through treaties approved by Congress. But as history shows, those treaties were often misunderstood, manipulated, or broken. Between 1778 and 1871, the U.S. ratified over 370 treaties with Native nations, and nearly all of them were broken. Many of these treaties were signed under extreme pressure after war, displacement, or by exploiting translation gaps between languages. Tribes thought they were securing their way of life, hunting, fishing, and living freely on reserved lands. In exchange, they ceded vast regions, 1.5 billion acres, with the promise that the U.S. government would care for their people's health, education, and welfare forever. But today, reservations are often marked by poverty, incarceration, underfunded services, and remote locations lacking infrastructure or even clean water. This wasn't the vision tribes signed onto. And yet, these promises, the treaties, are still legally valid. They're upheld by landmark cases like the Marshall Trilogy, which confirmed that if the federal government takes land from sovereign tribes, they owe compensation in the form of essential services. That's the basis of the federal trust responsibility, a legal obligation. But did all branches of government honor that? Not exactly. The War Department set up the Office of Indian Affairs, aiming to implement Manifest Destiny, the belief that Europeans were destined to control the continent. This ideology led to policies like the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which forced thousands off their lands and onto unfamiliar territory, most infamously through the Trail of Tears. 60,000 Native people were forcibly relocated, many dying on the journey. Jessica Imadachi, a Chickasaw tribal member from Oklahoma, explains it powerfully. Her ancestors signed treaties believing in a permanent promise that their people would be taken care of for 7 generations and beyond. Health, housing, education, all of it. But how do you still hold the U.S. accountable today? Later laws like the Indian Appropriations Act formalized the reservation system and introduced things like blood quantum and land allotment, fracturing Native governance and legal protections. Worse, when non-natives bought land within reservations, they weren't bound by tribal law, making it nearly impossible for tribes to keep their citizens safe. So are reservations just a tragic consequence? Not at all. Ask any Native person what their reservation means to them, and you'll hear ceremony, community, love, history, and resilience. Yes, sometimes pain and trauma too, but above all, identity. That's why things like the census and voting matter deeply, because when you're counted, you're heard, you matter. Voting determines federal funding and power. Today, Native communities organize politically not just at the ballot box, but in the courts, pushing to ensure treaty promises are finally honored. So what would happen if those treaties, legally the supreme law of the land, were fully honored? Imagine schools, hospitals, and infrastructure on reservations that meet actual needs. Imagine removing man-made fences that block traditional hunting routes. Imagine the Indian Health Service being properly funded, not under budget by $51 billion, while the US pays 10 times that in interest. Because these treaties didn't say, if it's affordable, they said, as long as the water flows and the grass grows. That's the promise. And Native communities are still here, making sure America keeps it.